Even the negotiations themselves were being manipulated.
We used to gather information about the British military bases. When the British tried to be a little tougher in the negotiations, we would intensify the operations against them. And when they were softer, we would lighten the operations.
In London, concern grew for the safety of the 27,000 British civilians resident in Egypt. Eden stepped up the negotiations to get the troops out of Egypt. In return, he sought safeguards for British interests in the canal. But it was a gamble that depended on being able to trust Nasser. For Eden, it was an act of faith. He revealed his anxiety and need for support from the US in a letter to President Eisenhower.
We are being asked to give up something of real value. It is something which we have created as a result of the experience which we gained in the last war, at the cost of so many lives and so much expenditure of time and money. We are being asked to substitute for this, which we now hold, an agreement, which must in part be an act of faith in Egypt. And on this agreement will rest an essential element of the defense of the free world against aggression. That is why your help is so necessary.
But just as discussions were beginning in Egypt, Eden was struck down by a severe illness.
He'd had this disastrous surgical intervention for a gallbladder operation. When the surgeon had cut through the bile duct, the result was that he had these periodic bouts of high fever, very high fever, which laid him out.
After the first operation, the surgeon in Boston who'd done it said, well, you may be able to lead quite a normal life. You probably can do little things like sailing. Well, I mean, 3 months later, he was back at the Foreign Office, working day and night. You know.
It's grand to be home again after so long an absence. And the doctor, the surgeon who operated on me, told me yesterday that all was well. There was nothing else to worry about.
But beneath the apparent recovery lay a condition which would dog Eden for the rest of his career. Finally, Eden and Nasser reached agreement over the canal zone.
At long last, agreement has been reached. The main clause of the agreement states that all our troops will have left Egypt within 20 months and may only return if Egypt, any other Arab state or Turkey is attacked. These terms have created some indignation in Britain. Nevertheless, after a tense debate, the government secured approval for their actions. The pact has put Colonel Nasser in an even more powerful position.
It was a great feeling of happiness. After 72 years of occupation, we realized a very big victory, expelling the British occupiers out of Egypt, with Nasser as the driving force. And after signing the agreement, instructions were issued to halt all kinds of aggression against the British army.
With the withdrawal of the troops, the British adopted another strategy to maintain security in the Middle East. Along with the Americans, they helped found the Baghdad Pact, a pro-Western, anti-communist alliance of Middle Eastern states. But Nasser had no intention of entering such an alliance. He was more interested in consolidating his own power and influence in the region. Nasser set up the radio station Sawt al-Arab, Voice of the Arabs, to carry his defiant position of Arab nationalism.
The microphone served the revolution well. The revolutionaries utilized the radio station as an effective tool to send their message about ending colonialism.
Sawt al-Arab was highly popular throughout the Middle East. It called for Arab unity and freedom from imperialism. But the vitriolic broadcasts put Eden under huge pressure.
Newspapers used to make a great deal of fuss about Radio Cairo, which was vitriolic and fairly rough. We were continually bombarded by Number 10 to say, had we seen this and what did we make of that, and wasn't this really provocative and so on? And the answer was yes it was, and it was meant to be. It was a very hostile programme.
Eden decided it was time to meet Nasser face to face. It was the first and only time the two men would ever meet.
We were on our way to Bangkok for the CETO conference. We stopped off for one night in Cairo. And so the ambassador gave a dinner for Anthony to meet Nasser. And Nasser came to dinner, and he appeared to be sort of boisterous and happy and shouted away.
Each man came to the dinner confident of reaching an agreement. Eden wanted Nasser's propaganda station to cease from its anti-British broadcasts, and still had hopes of drawing Egypt into the Baghdad Pact.
Mr. Eden رفضا قاطعا.
Mr. Eden was faced by an absolute refusal in that regard. The argument of the Egyptian president was that you want us to join a pact against the Soviet Union, which is thousands of miles away and doesn't pose a threat, whereas the country that is a threat to Egypt is actually Israel, which is very close.
Nasser, opposed to foreign interference in the Middle East, sought assurances from Eden that he would stop encouraging other Arab states to join the alliance. He was more concerned with the ongoing struggle with neighbouring Israel. On the surface, the dinner had gone well, but proved to be an utter disaster.
He came up to my room afterwards and said, well, that went all right. But it turned out that Nasser had been deeply offended by every moment of the evening. He hadn't had the right clothes because the ambassador and Anthony had thought that Nasser coming to dinner, they better have black ties. And Nasser wasn't dressed right, and he was offended by the grandeur of the embassy. And then he was deeply offended because Anthony talked to him a bit in Arabic. He just felt inferior in every way, and then he was being upstaged, I think.
Ultimately, both men were disappointed. Eden pursued his attempts to get more Arab states to join the pact, infuriating Nasser.
When we tried to get Jordan into it as well, that was taken by Nasser as a provocation, because we had made Nasser a promise that we would not try and recruit Jordan. So Nasser thought he was being double-crossed.
Eden thought that he had secured a deal with Nasser, that Nasser would drop the incessant propaganda from Radio Cairo directed against our interests in the Middle East. The attacks on the Canal Zone base, for example, would be scaled down or stopped. But when he returned to London and found that everything went on as before, exactly, he felt that Nasser had betrayed him in a way, that he'd been deceived. It caused him certainly to regard Nasser as unfriendly, if not an enemy.
We are entitled to ask Egypt where she stands. If Nasser wishes to continue to denounce Britain and to oppose British policy in every way, let him say so. If not, let him make determined efforts to carry out the promise he made to me, and he will find me more than willing to meet him halfway.